Thanks everyone for joining us today for this in conversation with Courtney Barnett and Danny Cohen. On behalf of Courtney, Danny and MIFF, I'd like to start off by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we live, learn and work, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and pay respect to their elders past and present. MIFF talks are presented in partnership with the University of Melbourne, and we're very glad that you can join us today. My name's Brodie Lancaster. I'm a writer and critic from Melbourne. We're here to talk about Anonymous Club, Danny Cohen's feature documentary, which was supported by the MIFF Premiere Fund and follows a few years on the road and at home with Melbourne musician Courtney Barnett. Hi, Danny and Courtney.
Hi, Brodie. Thanks for having us. And thanks, MIFF.
I wanted to start by asking what the two of you kind of discussed or imagined when you first, the idea first came up to make a documentary together. And maybe how the finished project is either different from or similar to that kind of initial seed of an idea.
Danny and I had done a few projects together, and then I remember kind of this moment where we met one day to discuss a documentary, and my kind of very brief memory of it was just I kind of had this idea of getting Danny on tour to document just like all the great shows we were doing and the great places that we were going to. And that was kind of the very basic idea. There wasn't really a concept or we didn't really discuss it too much. But Danny, do you remember more?
I think it was a chat with me, you and Nick. I remember at the post office, and we were just trying to figure out what it could be and what the format could be and how it might differ from a normal documentary. I think I then spent time trying to figure out how we could do that, and I guess that's where the dictaphone came about. But I think it originally started as it to be a documentary somewhat on the creative process. I think that's kind of what Courtney and I have bonded on most over the years, both in our own fields.
Did you have stylistic or kind of visual references that you were drawing from as you were making it, either other music or tour documentaries, or just documentaries more broadly that you were kind of inspired by?
I tried not to watch too many going into it, but I think one of the main ones was Don't Look Back, which again, Courtney and I both love that film. But I think it's just trying to find a format that kind of suited both of us and suited me as a first-time feature film director and first-time documentary maker. So I was just trying to find something that was comfortable. And I guess same with Courtney as well with the dictaphone, to find something that she can feel comfortable to do and participate. And
Was the dictaphone kind of, had you seen that used somewhere, or did it just come up as kind of like a tool for getting the best kind of narration possible without the kind of presence of a camera?
I think it was kind of inspired by Courtney's shyness. Sorry, Courtney, it's not a bad thing. Just as an idea to get Courtney to be able to talk comfortably and not feel that pressure of a camera, when I'm asking questions and whatnot. Or I just feel like very few people are really good at it, to be on camera and kind of be quizzed and say the things that they want to say at that time.
It feels kind of related to, like you mentioned, Don't Look Back. I remember that was one of the first things I ever studied at like my uni cinema classes, and like learning the concept of like cinema verite and like pretending the camera's not there, but the way people behave in front of a camera is different to how they behave when a camera's not there. And so the idea of kind of getting the most truthful response out, like it makes sense to eliminate that element altogether.
I mean, yeah, to do your best to anyway. I mean, I'm 6'4" or 5, and so I'm kind of this big giant in a room anyway. Yeah.
I think it definitely, I mean, from my end, it definitely changed the way that I interacted. Like as soon as a camera gets on me, I go quiet. But yeah, so I think in that way it was a good idea, Danny.
Courtney, when were you kind of thinking about pulling out the dictaphone? Did you have like a routine that you would speak into it every day, or was it just like when something was happening or when you were alone?
Yeah, normally when I was alone, I didn't ever have a great routine. It was kind of like when I used to like I've gone through phases in my life of journaling or like, you know, keeping a diary, and the same, I'd kind of always think about it and think about doing it, but never get around to doing it. So the dictaphone was kind of similar, and I had to be like very alone. The thought of someone in the room next door to me listening like put me off it straight away, and I was like, I'll just do it tomorrow. It was a lot of I'll just do it tomorrow, as Danny probably knows, because he would just get like lumps of dictaphone. Like I'd go through a productive talkable phase.
I think it was just about trying to just get into the swing of it by giving Courtney prompts of like, just, you know, start off with anything. Like it doesn't have to, you know, don't feel the pressure of having to say anything profound or anything, you know, important, or worry about that it's going to be used in the film later. I'm just like, just tell me anything. Tell me what you have for breakfast, or tell me what you're going to do today, or just like limit it to 20 seconds and be like, I'm just going to say, you know, I need to get a haircut or whatever it is, just to try and get comfortable with the rhythm of it and doing it regularly.
It's kind of like I've never done the artist way, but you know how people are always like morning pages, you just sit down and like something comes out even when you don't expect it to.
I feel like I've tried the artist way a few times, and like as an artist, it's just have never finished it and just can't do it.
Have you ever done artist way, Courtney?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I think it's more about like giving it a go maybe than completing it.
I like that the narration kind of gets to like as close as possible to it, like an unfiltered, unself-conscious image of you, Courtney. And it kind of plays out over what feels like a very long stretch of time. When, like, on a practical level, were you recording the narration at the same time as you were shooting, or were those things happening? Was the narration happening when you weren't around Danny and you didn't know what Courtney was kind of going through or doing? And like, were you trading the audio files back and forth, and were you able to plot out like a narrative as it went out? That's a lot of questions all at once, but basically how did the process of like getting that audio work to like piece together the story that we see in the film?
It was really tricky because every time I'd film, I wouldn't know what Courtney's thinking. And then I'd only get, only back up the dictaphone every like month or 2 months or however long it was. So everything was kind of out of sync. So I'd be filming at this place or there or whatever. And in my head, I'm like, oh, I wonder what Courtney will say about this. Sometimes nothing, sometimes something, sometimes something awesome. So it's just like, it's always really out of sync. So it's kind of tricky to plan that narrative as you're going through. I kind of had I was listening back to the dictaphone as I was getting it and kind of taking notes, but not really sure on where it was going to go. It's only something that kind of came along in the edit, or we had a gist of what we wanted to do, but it was definitely those like 4 months of editing with my editor Ben that it all really came together. And you can kind of really form the right arcs based off different themes of the dictaphone, and trying to keep it all linear as well. And
Courtney, I'm curious to know like what combination of your existing friendship with Danny, the kind of privacy of those audio recordings, and like where you were in life and your career and on tour and what we see in the film, what kind of combination or elements of those things do you think led to you opening up in the way that you do in the film? Because it, like, you clearly felt you and Danny have a very trusting relationship for you to kind of open up in the way you do.
Yeah, I think that I mean, we were friends at the very start, but like not, I feel like over the time and like the closeness that we, like the kind of close proximity of tour, and we definitely became closer like over the process of making this film. And I think, like Danny was saying, like what we bonded over a lot in the kind of beginning, to me felt like a lot of kind of creative process, and just all those kind of creative fears, and you know, we would talk pretty openly about that as friends, and I found that really kind of interesting, and to be vulnerable and then to have someone be vulnerable back, I think, you know, creates that kind of trust and openness.
As I was watching the film, I kept thinking about like the idea of performance and like all the different ways that manifests in a position like yours. You know, you say early on in the film that you kind of struggle in interviews to say everything that you wish you could. And then when you step on stage, you're performing in a completely different way and putting on a show. And like, as we hear more about like your inner life, that really feels like you kind of have this on stage, I don't want to say character, but like you have to have this kind of different kind of confidence to perform in the way you do. Do you ever feel like you need to be kind of on and performing for a camera, or you know, the longer Danny was there with you on tour, was it easier to kind of feel like the camera wasn't there?
I probably went through a couple of little phases of being like, oh, I need to be more interesting or more funny, or I should prepare like some things so I seem really clever and witty. But I just ended it. Just I think I can't. It's just like it just feels unnatural. So I think I probably got a bit more used to it, definitely, but not like just like comfortable enough.
Danny, I'm curious to know what it is, having worked together a little bit before this, what it is about Courtney as an artist and a person that you wanted to communicate in the documentary and that you wanted people to kind of get out of it.
It wasn't so much like what sort of like how I want to portray Courtney as like an artist so much as a person. I feel like they're so intertwined. It's not like Courtney the artist and then Courtney the person, and they're two different sort of worlds. So I think by showing how those two are like completely linked, it kind of how do I put this? It just makes Courtney relatable, because all of a sudden you're not just looking at someone as, oh, that's just quote unquote the rock star. You're kind of seeing a bit of yourself in that person. And I think that's kind of what helps draw people in, because I don't like Courtney's not. I don't like talking about you in third person. You're right there. But you know, Courtney's not, I would say, the traditional rock star to what I see anyway. More so just kind of someone that's taken their passion to that level, and is obviously like extremely talented, and a lot of people connect with both the talent but also her storytelling and whatnot.
I just have like my memory of this film, beyond just like learning so much more about you, Courtney, is I just have like one visual picture in my head, and it almost feels like a postcard on the fridge. It's a scene, I think, in Niagara Falls. Is that right? And there's like kind of like a string of people up a mountain, all in those like tarp kind of raincoats. And I just was really curious, Danny, what your maybe like visual references are when you're shooting. Did you shoot the entire film? Did you shoot the entire thing on film? Like, what did you want this to look like beyond just what you wanted it to do and say about Courtney?
Yeah, it was all shot on 16mm. the shooting style I was trying to do was not walking around and having the camera move a lot. I was always trying to like position myself in the corner of a room, or position myself, or frame up and just kind of wait for the action to come in and out. So it wasn't really trying to follow too much of the action closely. It was kind of just letting it go. But when you're at a place like Niagara Falls and it's just like so beautiful, but then it's just like so mad with whatever that culture is there, like it's awesome, but it's just like such a beautiful hot mess. It's just like you just can't stop shooting everything when you're there. But it's funny because like, a day like that, there was a day off on tour where I was just like, cool, I'm gonna have a break. Like, I'm just gonna go see Niagara Falls for the first time. It's gonna be great. And then I kind of like always said to myself, I was like, just bring the camera, no matter what. And it's like so heavy and cumbersome, and you're always like the last person and to get off the bus and go through security and all that sort of stuff. So it's kind of like this like weird dead weight to everything. But you just like, I don't know, you just bring it because you're like, I should, and that's why I'm here. And you just don't really know what you're gonna get. And so, like this, you see those people snaking down a mountain in these little blue outfits, and it's just like, yeah, it was really special. But again, like, a scene like that paired really well with I don't want to ruin what Courtney was talking about, but just that moment.
They're also, I was just thinking, all those people are like all anonymous, but it's too on the nose,
No, I mean, I think there's a whole lot of like themes in the film about Courtney says it in there, if a lot of people are alone, maybe they're not so alone. So I feel like there's a lot to get from like the individual and how they fit into a group. And it wasn't something I set out to do. It just kind of became this narrative from hearing the dictaphone.
That idea is kind of related to Courtney. What I wanted to ask you next is, there feels like a kind of tonal and emotional shift in the film when you go from being on tour with your band to then going on your solo tour. And it feels like being on stage, there's like a different kind of intimacy with the audience, and one that like I maybe would have assumed would have been tougher to be up there by yourself, but you almost feel like it looks as though that was like you were more sure of yourself, or you were just in like a different like headspace that tour shifted something. Can you describe like that shift in what we see and what it's like to go from one state of performing to the other, being completely by yourself?
I think that I'm kind of eternally like confused and surprised by those things, and I never quite understand the answer myself, because I don't know if it's that I guess there's a certain number of things in line to kind of create those moments and moods, like in all those different setups. But I feel like something about I think I was pretty terrified about the solo tour because it was something I hadn't done for so long, and I was quite nervous. But then when I got in the kind of swing of it, for some reason, I guess being outside what was then outside my comfort zone must have just I don't know, it just it's like kind of being thrown in the deep end, and just I kind of had to talk more, and I had to do all these kind of different things that I wasn't quite used to, but it did create this different connection with the audience. And I guess I used to play solos so much in my early 20s, and then since then I haven't done it so much, so it was just very different. But yeah, it was a different kind of connection with the audience, but I think also with the songs, because the songs came out differently. They sounded so different being played solo. So I think everything, it was a bit overwhelming, but it was, in a good way.
It felt like there was a different connection to the camera as well. Like, I might be misremembering this, but I feel like that's the point in the film, Danny, where like we hear your voice from behind the camera a little more, and maybe a little less dictaphone, like you're much more a presence. Was that conscious as you were shooting that?
Yeah, it was. I think, taking stock on where we were at, from like the footage and the dictaphone, I kind of felt like I don't think just dictaphone and just, Courtney not interacting with the camera could sustain for 90 minutes. Like, it might feel too much like a montage. So I kind of thought we'd gotten close enough, and I think I kind of gave the question to Courtney, like, could we potentially try and, dictaphone on camera, or I could just give you prompts so we could just chat. And for a while there, I was kind of like asking Courtney a question. I'd like button off the camera and then wait for a response, trying to just see if I could show Courtney just chatting to camera, but it doesn't work. And it's like I kept getting rushes back. I was like, what am I doing? Like, it's just kind of like Courtney just like take after take, just like looking like she's answering questions, but without the question being asked. And I was just like, just rolling on this film, thinking that I was trying to hide myself. Like, I just didn't want to be, present. But then after a while, it's just like, if Courtney's on camera, I'm sure I can just have be a voice behind camera. But it helps in those situations where you're just kind of chatting, and after a while, the more you chat, I feel like the less the camera feels like a presence, and maybe it's just us hanging out.
It is really, like, it's really nice to get to that point in the film too, because early on, like, the narration is addressing you. It's a dialogue between the two of you that we're all just kind of eavesdropping on. You mentioned there were like 4 months of editing involved. Was that completely when you were done shooting, or were you kind of piecing it together as you went and plugging holes that you noticed?
No, that's when we were done. I started filming just before Courtney went on that tour, or just before Tell Me How You Really Feel, second album came out, and then it was kind of just after this next album was finished recording. So it kind of felt nice to finish it there.
I feel like we've come like a really long way in time, but also like in the feeling of the film too.
Yeah, I think that's probably reflected in Courtney's music too.
I was curious to know like how the events of the last couple of years impacted like the final stages of making the film, and Courtney as well, like the writing and recording of your new record, which we see little bits and pieces of.
We were nearly finished filming when COVID happened. Maybe 6 months or so, I can't remember exactly how much, but Courtney was back at home. We kind of both left that LA time, and it was just started to kind of heat up then. But I kind of just didn't want to show it as COVID. By then we were already really tired of it, and I was like, what would we be like in a year or whatever? Just so much, so many COVID stories coming out, and I just thought we just don't need to discuss it or allude to it so much like that. But I think we were kind of like on and off with the editing, but we had exemptions because we were a feature film already in post-production and whatnot. But it was just Ben and I, the editor, going in every day. So it didn't affect us too much, but aside, I think there's maybe the Byron stuff, or not Byron, Mount Warning that we filmed. That was kind of in the midst of it. We had to get permits for that.
Yeah, I forgot that there was quite a little bit of filming kind of in COVID time, wasn't there?
There was a scene that I didn't put in, that was shot during COVID, where we kind of like, Courtney was in the apartment at the second floor, and I was kind of on the street and just filming the conversation there. We're on the phone to each other, and I'd mic'd her up, and it was good. It was great. Why isn't it in the film, Courtney?
That's a great story.
What were you guys talking about at that point, when you were back home?
I remember for that shooting day, I think it was, you're having a shit Thursday, I think. But you're like, that's cool, it's Thursday, it comes every week. And it was something really good about it. I just couldn't find a home for it, as with a lot of stuff.
I do remember there was a little bit of like, because there's the bit that did make it in the film that was like, I'm so excited to play music with other people again. Did that end up in the film?
It did, yeah.
Because at that point I'd been sitting in my flat for like 6 months or more, just playing acoustic guitar by myself, writing these songs. And by the time kind of lockdowns and things like that ended, I was very excited at the kind of that idea of being able to play music with any other human.
There was like there's a scene, I think you mentioned it was Mount Warning. You guys are outside kind of banging on something, recording sounds for the new album. And it really does feel kind of, I think we as a viewer feel the same kind of relief that I imagine it was to like be in that place of like, oh, she's outside again. Like, Courtney, you described kind of early in the documentary having a block between like what the conversation about your last record that you wanted to have and the one that you were able to have in interviews, which eventually kind of, I think you have that conversation in this film and with Danny. Did the kind of environment that you guys created together enable you to have that conversation about, you know, you say fragility and mental health and depression that you had been trying to figure out how to have during your album press cycle?
Yeah, I think a little bit. I think if anything, like it was maybe just a long lesson in like understanding that process can just be slow, or, you know, to kind of, maybe I was like hard on myself, comparing myself to other people of how to act or how to react or whatever it was. But yeah, I think I felt, you know, like we were saying before, just very safe. Danny's very kind of caring, very patient person and friend. And so it was kind of a nice way to unpack some of those things, and, you know, and be able to talk from our own experiences about just making art in general and life in general and how we move through the world. Because I think it's all kind of connected, you know, it's not just about like the songs or how to talk about things in press, but just life in general and how to move through it. That's kind of what it feels like to me, kind of under the kind of banner of music and touring and all that stuff. But it definitely yeah, I think that was the general kind of lesson of just learning how to do things at my own pace and yeah, understanding that better.
Mm-hmm. Danny, did you kind of have an awareness going into making the film with Courtney that was going to be like a discussion point or something that she might be kind of trying to overcome or just get through?
I had no idea what I was going to get back at all. Yeah, that one was definitely a surprise, but it all was. Yeah, I've told Courtney a bunch of times, but I remember the first time that I got the first bunch of dictaphones back, I just was like sitting on the bus listening to them. I just was like, just a side I hadn't encountered before with Courtney, and I felt really lucky and like privileged, and you know that Courtney trusts me with that sort of information.
That idea that you were talking about, you know, not kind of really understanding maybe what Courtney might want to talk about until you're listening to the dictaphones. It just made me think, you know, you guys are clearly good friends, have worked together a lot and spent a lot of time together, but I kind of think the people in my life like that, who if I had them basically tell me everything that they were thinking and feeling, you learn a lot about somebody.
It's this kind of weird thing that like you hear on the dictaphone, and it might be a story that Courtney's had a hard day, and you know, I hear it 2 months later and I'm like, well, do I reach out to Courtney, or then is it weird because then she's like, oh, maybe then, you know, if I bring it up, she's like, oh, I don't really want to talk about that now in person when it was 2 months ago, and then maybe I don't want to talk about some more things in the future. So it's kind of like, it's just hard hearing that stuff because you just like want to just respect it as a film and, you know, put it aside. But also you're just humans and you're just like, well, this person's had a rough day and going through something. So you just naturally want to talk about it. But I think there was one time, Courtney, where I was like, hey, you know, is this all right or whatever, and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, what was that? And then I was like, nothing, don't worry about it. I was just like, you know, not wanting to dig stuff up again, but you know, you just naturally worry because you're friends.
Yeah, and I think on that point, like Danny, you were very, very caring. Like, yeah, you obviously were trying to balance or like find that balance of that line, but I definitely felt very, you know, you checked in, you know, and I knew that you were there for me, so it was very nice.
Courtney, you describe your new record in comparison to Tell Me How You Really Feel as being more open and tender and about being a loving person, which is like a really beautiful description of an album. And I was curious to know, by the end of the film, are you there? Like, are you in that place? Like, do we see you get there?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I feel like it's probably a whole lot of things I'm still kind of coming to understand myself, but definitely wherever my head was at years ago, or when I was writing some of the other songs on the last album, was a different headspace to where these newer songs were coming from. But yeah, it's probably a little bit of a process, but I think probably by the end of the film it was definitely somewhere different from where it started.
We get a real sense of time and place in the documentary, especially I noticed when you mentioned the bushfires that were happening at the time. Like, that is such a specific time that we live through here. Besides the clips of you making your new record between lockdowns and everything else last year, what would a documentary of this new record feel like? Like, what was your headspace? What has your headspace been like since you finished talking to the dictaphone and shooting with Danny and being on tour?
It feels like a little bit of a kind of whirlwind of, you know, how it kind of feels like this last year has been the longest year ever, but also incredibly short and quick in other ways. It's kind of a weird, a strange one to try to like find perspective or try to compare. Like, I can't find any comparisons that make sense to me, but yeah, I think that maybe because of, you know, the circumstances, I was kind of allowed this kind of space and time which maybe I wouldn't have had otherwise. So it kind of I think that helped, that affected this album probably a whole lot more than anything else. More like, you know, it would have, I guess it just would have been a different album if circumstances were different. But I mean, it's so hard to know that. But yeah, it feels, I think that I was kind of chasing a feeling of what I was not feel like. I was kind of having a lot of moments of uncertainty and kind of anxieties, and but like a different kind of brand last year, and I think I was chasing a kind of calmness, and a kind of calm's probably the best word for it, but I think that's the kind of music that I was trying to make, and it kind of reflects that in a way.
I have one more question for both of you, and I would love to know what spending this intensive time together making a project like this and being in dialogue from in front and behind the camera together, what you took away from one another. Like Danny, what did you kind of learn about Courtney, or Courtney, what, were you inspired by Danny in some way? I would love to just know a little bit about how your friendship kind of morphed over the making of Anonymous Club.
I don't know how to answer it so directly, but I just think in general, I'm just really proud of Courtney's willingness and her vulnerability to go where she went with it, because if you don't open up enough, people can't relate to it and it feels closed off or something like that. So I feel like I'm just really happy for her, and I think for the film, and it's really it's something really special. But as a friendship, I think it's just great that we're kind of have just gone from creative collaborators to friends to really close friends now, and I just love that. I'm towards the end of the filming, it's hard because we're good friends, and you're just kind of like, okay, well, we've got to film, we're filming, and it just becomes this thing that's like it's not a chore at all, like I don't mean it like that, but it just becomes this thing that you do. And so I just am really looking forward to, and we've been spending some good time together of hanging out and not having a camera in the room and just being friends and enjoying the company of one another, and being silly without having to without it feeling like it's being recorded.
If you spend time together but didn't film it, did it really happen? Gordon, what about you?
Well, in a way, it's kind of nice. You said before, Brodie, in a little way, the film is kind of a conversation between Danny and I, which I think a lot of it for me, I mean, again, it would have been a very different film working with someone else. And I think a lot of whatever I was kind of learning or finding out about myself was supported, by along the way by our friendship. And I think it was just nice along becoming much better friends in that process. And just kind of, I don't know, it's a funny kind of, I don't quite know how to answer the question, but I guess I have lots of positive things to say about our friendship. And I think that the process of this film has just made it a whole lot stronger, which is nice. But yeah, just working with such a kind of generous and sensitive, caring person obviously makes a big difference, because obviously I was going through all my own kind of insecurities and doubts and fears, and to kind of have a patient and level-headed ear on the other end of that is definitely kind of a nice thing to have.
Thanks, Courtney. So sweet.
Thank you so much for your time, and also all of the time that you put into making such a beautiful film. I thought I knew a lot about you, Courtney, and I learned so many new things. It was beautiful, like visually beautiful and very stylish, and I really loved it.
Thanks so much, Brodie. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.